I will explain about the orientation. What is orientation? Orientation is a review where, in order to determine the attitude, direction, place, and others correctly. Orientation can also be interpreted a view which is based on tones, concerns, and tendencies that exist at that time. For example, let's say name Andy. Andy fell in love with his beautiful secretary. Second sentence, Andy and his beautiful secretary fell in love. So the main use of language is to talk about the word, but in doing so, the facts are usually described from point of view or another. This orientation gives a rise to differences in meaning that are sometimes subtle and sometimes gross. They can also be utilized to say a lot in just a few words toward speaker or subject. Although the example sentence that I say seem to have the same meaning at first glance, but they are different in a significant way. While first sentence say only the Andy was attracted to, to the secretary, and second sentence means that Andy and the secretary love each other. In this first case, Andy has those feelings, while in the second they both do, as both are mentioned in the subject of the sentence. In this part, I will explain speaker oriented. Speaker oriented can be applied a notion of orientation to a request. This notion of orientation is also useful to understand the nature of the word please. This adverb is not just a semantically empty marker that adds a polite flavor to request. In effect, politeness in English, giving a freedom of choice to the address, is not shown so much by please as by could you or would you. Rather, please is a way to note that the action is to benefit the speaker, and that she will be obliged if the request is properly carried out. We can use please, then in request, please, and wishes. For example, a request when you make a sentence, a request like please wash the dishes, and then will you please wash the dishes. This is a strong command, and please let me go with you, mommy. This is a plea. And then but using it in giving a suggestion, advice, or permission is, for example, like why don't you please stay in bed. This is for example, for suggestion. And example for permission is, can you please go home now, uh, like that. So from the example that I have presented is speaker oriented.
So, orientation towards subject. In syntax, the most common way to have an orientation towards the object is to make the sentence passive. The importance of the subject is shown, for example, by reflexive pronouns, the following which identify the subject regardless of what nominal it contains. For the example, Mary told John about herself, and Mary told John about himself. And another example, John was told by Mary about himself. John was told by Mary about herself. This notion of viewpoint or orientation is not restricted only to verbs. It is fundamental to understanding what some kinds of adverbial expressions are used to describe, and in this example, John sold that old car to Bill out of kindness. Bill bought that old car from John out of kindness. So, you might think that to buy and to sell describe one and the same situation, so that there ought to be no difference in what this sentence means. If we take a closer look at the adverbial out of kindness, however, we find that it was John who was being kind to Bill in the first sentence, and quite the reverse in the second. This sort of adverbial phrase describes the attitude of the subject of the sentence. It is subject oriented. At the end of the sentence, this describes its deep or logical subject. What would be the subject if the sentence were not passive? So, making a sentence passive does not change this connection. The following examples are not very different. For the example, John hit Billy on purpose. Billy was hit by John on purpose. At the center of a sentence, at the special place for adverbs right after the first auxiliary verb. However, the adverbs in the first column can also describe the surface subject, the actual subject of the sentence as it stands. So, there is an important difference then between subject orientation and speaker orientation. This difference was seen most clearly in sentence adverbs, and we saw beside that some of the subject-oriented ones could be oriented towards the surface subject as well as the logical subject.
Hello everyone, I would like to explain about the last material from our group. So the last material is other orientations. In the other orientations, there is police and politeness. Let me read for you before. This notion of orientations toward the subject can be extended to the pairs of adjective on the left below that give problems to most learners of English. The ones that derive from verbs or features, however, from an easy-to-remember system that extend naturally to the plain adjective or ag. So, in the other orientations, in most of the sentence, there are adjectives and a verb. So you can see the example on page 83. So the example is STMs, it means stimulus, and EXPR is experience, and related VB is a verb. So the example is VB plus or verbs pleasing. So the EXPR or experience is police, and related VB or related verb is to please. Surprising, surprise, to surprise. Distressing, distressed, to distress. So AG or adjective in STMS or the stimulus is bothersome. So the experience is bothered. So the related VB is to bother. Delightful, delighted, to delight. Troublesome, trouble, to trouble. suspicious, to suspicious of, to suspect, pleasant, and happy. Although both types are oriented towards their subjects, they differ greatly in what their subjects can designed. The first of its pairs takes a stimulus or STMS, like I said before. The STMS it means is stimulus. The first of its pair takes a stimulus as a subject, the event or the thing that produces the emotions, as in the first example below. Quite to the contrary, in the second of its pair, the subject the emotion, the subject points to the person or animal that receives or experience or EXPR. The emotion with much the same meaning. For example, this news is quite distressing to me. But the adjective is I am quite distressed at the news. The difference between these sorts of pairs then is that the first is oriented to the object or even that cause the emotions, or or STMS or the stimulus, while the second is oriented to the experience of it. So in this part there is a making request. Let me read for you. We will be likely to add at least would or want you at the beginning, as in the second example, which in an ordinary polite regal request, or tag as in the third, which is a bit more familiar. So making requests, when we want to making some requests to make a request to do a something to me or to you, you can use or add would or want you in the polite way. So we call it is a polite way. So the last is the conclusion of this material. The conclusion is we show how requests and allied pointers are commonly marked for aspects of the relationship between speakers, such change is include by adding the two, as is your garden is swimming with the killer's bees. We see then how the orientation when the subject can be expanded in the various specific orientation when the subject used to express specific relationship with the main verb of the sentence. Thank you.